Thank you, Acting Speaker. I rise to support the Crimes Amendment Recruitment of Children for Criminal Activity Bill of 2026, and I do so before coming to the substance of the bill and seeking to rebut some of the claims of the opposition, notwithstanding they will be supporting this bill. I come to this debate also as someone who is the Parliamentary Secretary for Community Safety, the member for Pascoe, Vale, but also as someone who really got involved in politics as a result of three things originally that got me interested in politics and government. The first was that we had Bob Hawke as our local federal member of parliament at the time, who was also the Prime Minister, which was quite inspirational. The second thing is I grew up in a time when we had a Kennett Liberal government that closed 12 local schools in my community, including the original 12 high schools in my community, including Coburg High, which my brother and sister used to go to, and saw me end up really going to Northcote High. So I feel you're the member for Mildura 100% on that. And the third thing that really got me interested was the fact that we didn't have a youth centre at the time when I was growing up in my community. And so me and quite a few other enthusiastic young people at the time started a campaign which was called the Oxygen Youth Campaign, which was all about creating breathing spaces for young people, because far too often at the time in the old local papers we saw young people being disparaged far too often in the local media coverage, talking about young people who were loitering at the local station or who may be named as bludgers or binge drinking or undertaking other types of antisocial behaviour. And a group of us young people got together and we said, that's not right. The young people we know overwhelmingly make a positive contribution to our community through our schools, our sporting clubs, our community groups and the like. But those young people who may be undertaking in those types of behaviours, they need our help, not our demonisation. So we started Oxygen, which was about creating breathing spaces for young faces, which led us to help construct really the funding towards the Harmony Park skate park, which is there on Gaffney Street now, a skate park at CB Smith Reserve in Fawkner, quite a few other initiatives. But the jewel in the crown of Oxygen, Acting Speaker, was the Oxygen Youth Centre and Youth Hub, which still stands there today on Gaffney Street at the back of Coburg Lake. It is a multi-service youth council hub which supports thousands of young people every single year through different types of programs, initiatives and outreach, and still very much does an incredible job in supporting socioeconomic health and wellbeing outcomes for our community. But obviously since then, since its opening in 2013 it was, I believe, we have seen issues around young people continue to become more serious, particularly when it comes to youth crime. And on that note, I just want to also, on a sombre note, acknowledge Van Viet Trong, the 60-year-old owner of Hong Hung Asian Grocery in Sunshine, whose tragic death has deeply affected Melbourne's western suburbs, particularly the Vietnamese Australian community. And Mr Trong was a local shopkeeper, a husband, a father and a much-loved member of his community. And obviously, police allege he was fatally injured after intervening during an incident involving young people in Hampshire Road. A 15-year-old has been charged with manslaughter and remains before the courts, and I will therefore say nothing further to prejudice those proceedings. But we can say this: a man went to work and did not come home. A family has lost someone they love, and a community is deeply grieving, and traders and residents are understandably asking what more we can do to keep them safe. And I commend the Premier for visiting, the member as well for Laverton, the member for St Albans and the Police Minister's efforts in proactively reaching out to the community. It's a community I also know very well. I used to work at Brimbank City Council there for quite a few years as the Advocacy Officer and Director, and we recently actually held a VRU, Violence Reduction Unit, forum in Sunshine, just off Hampshire Road at the Visi Care Centre, talking about these very issues. And that is why our community safety must remain one of our highest responsibilities as legislators in this place, because all Victorians deserve the right to feel safe in their homes, in their communities, in their streets, in their neighbourhoods, in their workplaces as well. And that's rightly why they expect serious consequences for serious crimes. And obviously there has been enormous public discussion about youth crime, and sometimes perceptions and reality can diverge, but governments cannot use that observation to dismiss what people are really experiencing. There has been genuine and deeply concerning concentration of serious offending involving a relatively small cohort of young people through home invasions, carjackings, armed robberies, stolen vehicles, assaults, arson, weapons, offending and others. We must neither exaggerate that challenge nor seek to minimise it. And there are encouraging signs. In the year to March 2026, Victoria's criminal incident rate fell by nearly 3% and youth offending rate fell by 6%, the largest reduction in alleged youth offending since before the pandemic, and aggravated burglary fell 22% and robbery fell 15%. In my own community of Marybeck, total offending fell 13%, robbery fell 29%, and weapons offending fell 19% over that period. And those figures, they do matter, but they do not mean the job is done, because crime does remain too high. Serious youth violence remains too high, repeat offending remains too high, and one family whose home is invaded, one shopkeeper who's attacked, or one innocent person killed is one too many. That's why this government has strengthened the law. We have introduced what are now amongst Australia's toughest bail settings, and the evidence shows that those laws are being used. Remand has increased. People being remanded, offenders or alleged offenders being remanded, is up 70%. That's 10,000 more offenders that have been remanded. Bail revocations are up by 84%, and children's court bail refusals are up by 1/3. We have introduced adult time for violent crime, increasing the likelihood of imprisonment and potential sentences for young people aged 14 and over who commit specified serious violent offences. We increased penalties for offences including aggravated home invasion and aggravated carjacking. We strengthened knife laws and banned machetes. We're investing $117.5 million into a specialised fast-track county court youth list so serious matters can be determined sooner. And last year, we increased the maximum penalty for the existing offence of recruiting children to commit crime from 10 to 15 years. And police had already laid 64 charges under that offence when this legislation before us today was introduced, because the victims and communities deserve and expect consequences for serious crime. And this bill before us is another step in that important work. Because the question we need to ask ourselves is who is actually pulling the strings overwhelmingly when it comes to youth crime. The teenager caught committing the offence may be the most visible participant, but who told them to do it? Who offered the money? Who selected the target? Who supplied the instructions? Who organised the vehicle? And who profits? And who sits safely behind most overwhelmingly encrypted accounts while someone else's child takes all the risk? And more often than not, we know that it's organised crime. And organised crime has changed over the years. It's no longer necessarily a meeting in a back room between hardened criminals. Recruitment can happen through social media, gaming platforms and encrypted messaging applications. Instructions can come from another suburb, another state, or, as we have seen reported, even another country. And organised criminals identify vulnerabilities in recruiters, and they seek to exploit vulnerable young people, whether it's through money, status, belonging, trauma, disengagement from school, mental ill health, family instability, disability, intellectual disability and development, and social isolation. And the Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission has warned that organised crime groups deliberately target young people because they are cheaper to hire, easier to influence, impressionable and readily accessible online. And think about the business model behind that for a moment. An adult criminal transfers the danger, transfers the visibility, transfers the prospect of arrest, transfers the possibility of injury or death, transfers the prison sentence, and potentially transfers all of that onto a vulnerable child or children while keeping the profits for themselves. That is not merely recruitment, that is exploitation. And if we are serious about dismantling organised crime, we cannot simply arrest the person at the bottom of the criminal food chain. We have to climb to the very top of it, to the crime boss and all the others in between. And that is what this legislation is designed to help us do. The existing offence applies to an adult who recruits a child into criminal activity carrying a maximum penalty of at least 5 years. The bill creates a distinct aggravated child recruitment offence for the most serious category of crime, offences carrying a maximum penalty of 15 years imprisonment or more, including life imprisonment. It captures 71 serious offences. Among them included murder, arson, home invasion, aggravated home invasion, carjacking, armed robbery, kidnapping, extortion involving threats to kill or injure, and much more. And the maximum penalty for an adult recruiter will be life imprisonment, and this reflects something very much fundamental, that if you are knowingly placing a child in the path of extreme violence while attempting to remain removed from its consequences, your criminal culpability is extremely high, and the law should recognise that. The bill also makes another important change. The prosecution will no longer have to establish that the recruiter actually knew the person was under 18. It will be sufficient to establish that the adult was reckless as to whether the person was a child. And with the time I have remaining, I just want to touch on the other important work we are undertaking, Acting Speaker, in this space. We've obviously supported Victoria Police with investment tools and powers and resources they need to keep us safe. We've recently announced the establishment of the Organised Crime Command, supported by a $170 million investment, which is bringing together a number of task forces, including Hawk, Viper, Lunar Eclipse, and adding specialist investigators to that important work. We're recruiting more PSOs. as well. But we've also established the Violence Reduction Unit, Australia's first public health-led model towards tackling root causes of crime, whether it's housing, unemployment, mental health, wellbeing, education and the like. VRU is undertaking extensive work, and I'm very proud as the Parliamentary Secretary to help support that work, which we're continuing to roll out through a number of initiatives to the $30 million plus we have allocated to a number of programs already being rolled out, including social workers in schools, youth mentors and so much more. And it's in that respect that I commend this bill to the Chamber.